It was the kind of October night that paints small-town Ohio in stillness, streetlights flickering over cracked sidewalks, the air thick with mist, and the smell of rain-soaked leaves. At 11:47 p.m., a waitress named Sarah Linton clocked out of her shift at the Rusty Lantern Diner, waved goodnight to her coworker, and drove off into the dark. She never made it home. By morning, her car was found just a few miles away, parked neatly on a gravel service road off Route 32. The doors were locked. Her purse sat untouched on the passenger seat. A half-finished cup of coffee steamed faintly in the holder, like she'd only just stepped out, but Sarah was gone. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, just silence, and a sense that something or someone had quietly erased her from the world. Police scoured the nearby truck stops, chasing rumors of a man in a dark rig who'd been harassing waitresses across the county that fall. But every lead ended the same way: nowhere. And as the years passed, Sarah's case faded into the background noise of America's unsolved disappearances. Then, 26 years later, a construction crew digging near an old drainage culvert unearthed a small rusted class ring engraved with SL. The DNA from the band would reopen the case, and what investigators later found in a forgotten storage locker would change everything they thought they knew about Sarah's final night. So what really happened to her after she left that diner? And how could the truth stay buried for more than 2 decades? If stories like this grip you like they do me, hit that like so more true crime lovers can find it. Comment where you're watching from. You're part of this true crime family now. And subscribe. It fuels this channel to bring you more stories just like this one. To understand what really happened that night, we need to go back to where it all began, in Millbrook, Ohio. A place so small that everyone knew everyone, and the local diner doubled as the town's heartbeat. In 1993, Sarah Linton was 24, balancing nursing school by day and late shifts at the Rusty Lantern Diner by night. She was known for her quiet kindness, the kind of person who'd refill your coffee without you asking, who remembered your order by heart. Her friends called her Sunshine, because even when she was exhausted, she smiled like she owed the world warmth. That night, October 12th, had started like any other. A drizzle had rolled in from the west, the air damp and cold. Inside the diner, the late crowd of truckers, mill workers, and regulars lingered over pie and cigarettes. Sarah was the last waitress on duty. Her co-worker, Denise, later recalled that Sarah seemed distracted, glancing at the window every few minutes, like she thought someone was out there. At 11:47 p.m., the register tape shows her clocking out. She waved to Denise, said she'd see her Friday, and stepped into the parking lot. The rain had stopped by then. The diner's neon sign flickered above her rusty lantern, buzzing weakly into the darkness. She got into her old blue '88 Corolla, turned onto Route 32, and disappeared. The next morning, when she didn't show up to her nursing clinicals, her roommate called the police. Within hours, deputies found her car pulled off on an old service road, half a mile past the truck stop exit. It was locked, parked perfectly straight. No damage, no broken glass. Inside, her purse, her wallet, her keys still in the ignition. Her half-finished coffee sat in the cup holder. One detective later said it looked like she'd just stepped out for a breath of air and never came back. No footprints, no tire marks, just mud and silence. Investigators canvassed the area. Locals mentioned that a dark semi-truck had been seen idling near the diner that week, and that a waitress at a neighboring town had reported being followed on her way home by a driver she couldn't identify. There had been complaints, vague reports of a man harassing young women at nearby truck stops, but back then, those stories rarely turned into investigations. Detectives looked into Sarah's personal life, boyfriends, co-workers, family. Nothing pointed to foul play. She had no enemies, no debts, no reason to run away. Her family described her as cautious to a fault. She carried pepper spray, called her parents every night. Still, rumors spread. Some said she'd left with a trucker. Others whispered she'd been having an affair. But none of that fit. Her bank account was untouched. Her apartment showed no sign of packing or planning. Weeks turned into months. Search parties combed the woods, ditches, and culverts near the old highway. A state helicopter even scanned the nearby quarry. Nothing. It was like Sarah had been swallowed by the night itself. By spring of '94, the case went cold. Evidence was minimal. DNA technology was in its infancy, and without a body or witnesses, the file ended up in the Millbrook County Archives, a thick brown folder labeled simply, Linton, Sarah missing person. For years, her parents left the porch light on, hoping she'd walk back through the door. Every few months, her mother called the sheriff's office, just to make sure they hadn't forgotten. They hadn't, but with no leads, there was nothing left to do but wait. One detective, James Corwin, never really let it go. He kept Sarah's photo in his wallet, saying cases like hers stick to your ribs. But when he retired in 2008, he admitted to a local reporter, "I think about that coffee cup. Every time I pass that road, I picture its steam still rising, like she's right there." Years became decades. Millbrook changed the diner, got new owners, the truck stop expanded, the service road overgrew with weeds. By 2019, Sarah's name had faded into local lore. High schoolers told ghost stories about her car, still parked somewhere in the woods. None of them knew she was real. Then came the highway expansion project. In July 2019, a road crew was clearing brush near a long-abandoned drainage culvert, barely a mile from where Sarah's car was found. One worker spotted something glinting in the mud. At first, they thought it was a bottle cap. But when they pulled it free, they realized it was a gold-class ring, rusted, caked in dirt. The engraving inside read, S.L. Millbrook High 87. Investigators confirmed what Sarah's family had known all along: she'd never taken that ring off. Her mother had given it to her after graduation, and it hadn't been found in her car. Until now. When the state lab ran DNA on the band, they found something no one expected. A trace profile, mixed with degraded skin cells, not Sarah's. The match came back to Daniel Roy Hensley, a long-haul truck driver who died in 2005. Hensley had lived 3 counties over and spent decades on the road. He'd never been connected to Sarah's disappearance. But buried deep in his employment history was a pattern that caught detectives' eyes. He drove freight routes that passed through Millbrook every Thursday night, the same night Sarah worked, closing shifts at the Rusty Lantern. The discovery reignited the case. Detectives started digging into Hensley's past arrest records, traffic stops, storage leases. That's when they found something chilling. After his death, a storage unit under his name had gone untouched for over a decade. It was finally auctioned off in 2020, after years of unpaid rent. The new owner, a collector, reported finding a box of personal effects, wallets, jewelry, and small keepsakes belonging to women from across several states. One item stood out: a Polaroid photo of a blue 2088 Corolla, parked on a dirt road, taken at night. The timestamp? The 12th of October 1993. Investigators finally had a direction. But they didn't yet understand the full picture: how that photo connected to Sarah's final hours, and why Hensley kept her ring for years after she vanished. Because inside that same locker lay something even darker. Something that would reveal what really happened after she left the diner, and why it had taken 26 years to surface. The Millbrook County Sheriff's Department reopened the case officially in late 2019. For the first time in 26 years, Sarah Linton's name was back on the board in the task force room, black letters on a white dry erase wall under the heading, Cold Case Review. Detective Laura Gaines, who'd grown up just 2 towns over, led the renewed investigation. She'd been 12 when Sarah vanished, old enough to remember the missing posters stapled to telephone poles, the candlelight vigils outside the Rusty Lantern diner. To her, this wasn't just a case. It was a chance to bring peace to the woman whose face had haunted her childhood. Laura began by studying everything they had. It wasn't much. The original evidence box contained only Sarah's car photos, a few Polaroids of the service road, her time card from the diner, and one tiny Ziploc bag with 2 cigarette butts found near the car, both untested back then. Now, with modern DNA techniques, even decades-old samples could speak. The lab ran the cigarette butts through the national database. The results came back. One of them matched Daniel Hensley. The confirmation hit like thunder. Hensley had been there. Hensley's history painted a troubling picture. Born in 1951, he'd dropped out of high school and started trucking routes by his early 20s. He had minor arrests, disorderly conduct, solicitation, a bar fight in Missouri, but nothing that screamed serial offender. Still, between 1986 and 2003, at least 5 women across 3 states had vanished along or near his known routes. None were ever tied to him. When detectives looked at his route logs, they found something even more disturbing. In the week of Sarah's disappearance, Hensley had logged a freight haul from Columbus to Huntington, a route that passed directly through Millbrook, but the mileage didn't add up. He'd driven 47 unaccounted miles that night. The new theory emerged. Hensley might have pulled into the Rusty Lantern lot, spotted Sarah finishing her shift, and followed her once she got on the road. Maybe he'd lured her over a mechanical excuse, a flashing light, something to make her stop. But speculation wasn't proof. Laura needed something physical, something that placed him with Sarah, not just near her. That's when the storage unit photos came back from forensic imaging. Among the recovered items were dozens of Polaroids, each labeled only with a month and year. Most showed empty rest stops, parking lots, gas stations, or stretches of lonely road all at night. Investigators suspected Hensley had photographed his own hunting grounds. One picture stopped them cold. A woman, brown hair, petite, standing beside a blue car, her face obscured by motion blur. Behind her, the faint glow of a diner sign. Zooming in on the reflection from the window, tech analysts identified part of a neon word, lantern. It was the Rusty Lantern Diner. The timestamp matched the week of October 1993. When Laura visited Hensley's last known address, she spoke with his widow, Margaret, who was now in her late 60s. Margaret remembered Sarah's photo from the missing posters. She told detectives that back in the 90 seconds, her husband would sometimes come home, quiet, almost shaken, especially after long hauls near the Ohio line. Then she added something that changed everything. He used to keep a little metal key on his chain, she said, one that didn't fit any lock in our house or truck. When I asked, he said it was for his locker, something private. But after he died, I never found what it opened. That locker, as it turned out, still existed. When detectives traced Hensley's old employer, a now defunct trucking company in Ironton, they found records of a company-issued locker rented under his ID. It had never been emptied. When they pried it open, what they found inside made even seasoned investigators step back. There were more mementos. A necklace. A small journal belonging to a woman named Heather Collins, missing from Kentucky in 1991. A photo strip of a teenage girl later identified as Michelle Brower, who vanished from a rest stop in 1995. And tucked behind an oil-stained envelope a hand-drawn map, scrawled in pencil on a diner napkin. It showed Route 32. A dotted line veered off into the service road. And beside it, written in shaky block letters, "Stop. She knows me." No one could explain what that meant. But the more Laura stared at it, the more it felt less like a map and more like a memory. They brought in cadaver dogs to search the area marked on the napkin. For 2 days, crews combed through mud, briar, and broken glass. On the 3rd day, a handler called out. At the edge of the old drainage culvert not far from where the ring had been found, the dogs alerted again and again. Buried just beneath the topsoil, wrapped in layers of deteriorated tarp, was a femur bone. DNA tests later confirmed what everyone already knew. It was Sarah Linton. News spread fast. After 26 years, Sarah's family finally had an answer, but not the kind they'd hoped for. Her mother, Ellen, told reporters, "I always said she didn't leave us on purpose. She was taken. Now I know I wasn't crazy." The media dubbed it the Route 32 killer, though investigators were cautious to connect Hensley officially to other disappearances without direct evidence. Still, the pattern was undeniable. Same stretch of highway, same profile of victims, same eerie stillness left behind. But one detail in the autopsy deepened the mystery. There were no signs of blunt trauma, no bullet wounds, no stabbing. Instead, microscopic traces of chloroform were found in the fabric near her remains, a substance used in the 90 seconds by certain freight companies for chemical cleaning. It was also easily obtainable to truckers. It suggested Hensley may have subdued her without violence, using his trade tools. Quiet, efficient, untraceable. Even after the official closure, Laura couldn't let go of one question. Why her? Out of hundreds of women who worked late shifts along his routes, why Sarah? When she revisited the diner's old employee files, she found a forgotten work record. Hensley had once filled in as a short-term freight driver for the diner supplier in 1992, delivering produce and dairy every Thursday. Sarah had been there that same summer. They'd crossed paths at least half a dozen times. She did know him, and the note in the locker, "She knows me," suddenly made sense. As Laura pieced together the timeline, a chilling picture formed. Hensley likely returned a year later, after Sarah had moved on from her summer shifts. Maybe he saw her again. Maybe she recognized him, a familiar face offering a friendly wave as she left work. That was all it took, a simple gesture that sealed her fate. By winter 2020, the department filed for formal case closure. Hensley was dead. Sarah's remains were identified. Justice, technically, was done. But for those who'd carried her story all those years, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like an ending, written too late. Detective Gaines stood on the same stretch of road where Sarah's car had been found, watching the cold wind sweep through the overgrown ditch. She said quietly to the local paper, "We don't get to choose which ghosts we chase. But sometimes, if we listen long enough, they lead us back to the truth." The file is now closed. The storage locker has been emptied. And somewhere in Millbrook, the rusty lantern sign still hums faintly against the night, the same light that once shone on a girl just trying to get home. But behind every solved case, there's always a question that never quite dies. How many more Sarah Lintons were out there buried just far enough off the road that no one ever looked twice? In the months following the discovery, Millbrook changed. The diner that had once been filled with laughter and the scent of frying bacon now carried a strange stillness. People spoke more softly there. They looked over their shoulders when the highway hummed in the distance. For Sarah's family, the closure brought both relief and new pain. Her mother stopped leaving the porch light on but couldn't bring herself to replace the bulb. Her father, who'd aged 20 years in half that time, rarely spoke at all. They buried what was recovered of her in a small cemetery on the outskirts of town, the same one her grandparents rested in. Detective Laura Gaines attended the service, standing back under a gray sky. She'd spent months buried in reports, interviews, and autopsy files, but that morning she realized something. Closure doesn't erase questions, it just sharpens them. Because despite the case being labeled solved, Laura couldn't stop thinking about the photographs. The ones from Hensley's locker, the empty rest stops, the women, the time-stamped roads, and especially the one of Sarah's car. Who took that picture? The assumption had always been that Hensley was the photographer. But when analysts enhanced the image further, they noticed something strange. A shadow, faint but visible, on the edge of the photo. The outline didn't match Hensley's build. The man was slimmer, taller. Someone else had been there. Laura quietly reopened a supplementary inquiry in early 2021, reviewing Hensley's known associates. The trucking industry in the 1,990 seconds was transient drivers, shared routes, swapped shifts, and often lived on the edge and of anonymity. One name stood out in the employment logs, Raymond "Buck" Keller. Keller had driven for the same company as Hensley in the early 90 seconds and was listed as a co-driver on several long hauls. His record was mostly clean, a few traffic citations, one assault charge dismissed in '89. He'd quit trucking in 2004 and vanished from paper after that. When Laura dug deeper, she found something that chilled her. In 2005, the same year Hensley died, Keller had been questioned in West Virginia for the disappearance of another waitress, a case that eerily mirrored Sarah's. The woman's car was found abandoned near a truck route, doors locked, personal belongings intact. The case was dropped due to lack of evidence. And guess who the lead investigator had been back then? James Corwin, the retired detective who'd once handled Sarah's case. Laura tracked Corwin down at his home in southern Ohio. He was 71 now, frail but sharp. He remembered every detail of the Linton case, the road, the coffee cup, the stillness. When Laura mentioned Keller's name, Corwin's eyes flickered. "I remember him. he said slowly. He came to the station once, said he'd seen a strange man near the diner that night, claimed he was trying to help, but when we pressed him for details, he got jumpy. Didn't want to sign a statement. Did you ever suspect him? Laura asked. Corwin sighed. We suspected everyone back then, but without evidence, you start to see ghosts in every face. He paused, then leaned closer. You think Keller was working with Hensley? Laura didn't answer. She didn't have proof, but every instinct told her the story wasn't over. A week later, a federal subpoena brought in Keller's old trucking records. They confirmed he and Hensley had been assigned alternating night routes for nearly 5 years, routes that overlapped dozens of rural highways across Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. But that wasn't all. An internal memo from 1993 showed both men were disciplined for falsifying mileage logs that very same month Sarah disappeared. The reason? Unverified off-route miles. The number, 47, the same missing miles from Hensley's final logbook. Laura's theory evolved into something darker. Hensley wasn't acting alone. He may have been the driver, the lure, the familiar face, but Keller, the quieter, less noticeable man, might have been the enforcer, the one who followed behind in another rig or waited on the road's shoulder. A two-man pattern practiced, efficient, nearly invisible. If true, it meant that while Hensley's death ended his half of the story, Keller might still be alive, and if he was, he'd had 15 years of freedom. In March 2021, Laura coordinated with state and federal agencies to trace Keller's whereabouts. It wasn't easy. He'd changed addresses half a dozen times, lived under his middle name, and eventually gone off-grid. Finally, a DMV renewal in Moundsville, West Virginia, pinged a match. Keller, now 73, was living in a dilapidated trailer park outside town, collecting disability. When investigators arrived, they found his trailer cluttered with old newspapers, rusted tools, and a faded photo album sitting on the table. Inside were snapshots of highways, diners, and rest stops, the same kind of images Hensley had taken, except these had newer timestamps: 2006, 2008, 2010, meaning Keller had kept traveling long after his partner died. When they questioned him, Keller denied everything. I don't know, no Sarah Linton, he rasped, leaning on his cane. You people already blamed my buddy. Let him rest. But when shown the enhanced Polaroid from Hensley's locker, the one with the unknown shadow, Keller froze for just a second too long. That's not me, he said, looking away. It's him. Always was him. Laura noted the tremor in his voice. She pressed harder. You knew where he was that night. He laughed softly. Ma'am, there's a lot of nights I don't remember, but I do remember this: not every ghost you're chasing wants to be found. He wouldn't say another word. A week after that interview, Keller was found dead in his trailer. Apparent heart failure. Beside him on the counter sat a half-empty beer can, a worn Bible, and a folded piece of paper. It was a map, drawn in the same shaky handwriting found in Hensley's locker. This one, however, wasn't marked with a single spot. It had 4. Each was labeled only with a woman's name, and one of them wasn't Sarah's. It was Jenny, 1995. When the team cross-referenced missing persons from that year, they found her, Jennifer Albright, 22. Last seen leaving a diner in Kanawha County, West Virginia. She'd vanished almost exactly 18 months after Sarah. Her case had gone cold too. Same circumstances: parked car, keys inside, no sign of a struggle. When cadaver dogs were deployed to the first site marked on Keller's map, a wooded area near an abandoned truck stop, they found remains within 6 hours. DNA confirmed it: Jennifer. A second victim of the same route. The FBI soon launched a joint investigation, confirming what Laura already suspected. Hensley and Keller had been operating together, preying on isolated women along trucking routes for nearly 2 decades. Sarah Linton had simply been the one whose case refused to die quietly. That night, Laura returned to the diner. It was late, the parking lot empty except for her car. The new neon sign buzzed above her, same color, same hum. She stood where Sarah's Corolla had once been parked and looked down the dark stretch of Route 32. The air was still. Rain clouds rolled in. In her mind, she could see it, the headlights, the reflection of neon on wet asphalt, a waitress stepping into her car for the last time, and somewhere beyond that road, two men in separate trucks, waiting in silence. Millbrook finally had its answer. But truth, Laura realized, rarely brings peace. It just fills the silence with more echoes. Because now, every time she drives that stretch of Route 32, she can't help but think, how many others drove past those same men and never even knew what was sitting in the dark beside them? By summer 2021, the Route 32 investigation had grown far beyond Millbrook. Federal analysts began linking Hensley and Keller to disappearances stretching as far west as Indiana and as far south as Georgia, all within a web of old freight routes they had shared through the 1,990 seconds. The FBI called it Operation Lantern, a name borrowed from the diner that had unknowingly anchored the horror. For local residents, it was surreal, the quiet truck stop off Route 32 becoming the epicenter of a multi-state manhunt for victims who had been missing for decades. Detective Laura Gaines was placed as liaison between Millbrook PD and the Bureau. She worked 12-hour days reviewing route logs, service tickets, and gas receipts from a company that had shut down 15 years earlier. Piece by piece, she and her team rebuilt a map of where the two men had driven every rest stop, motel, and diner that had lined their path. And slowly, the same pattern kept emerging. Women who vanished between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., usually while traveling alone or closing late shifts near rural highways. The similarities were so precise that agents began calling it a timeline of ghosts. One night, while reviewing Hensley's confiscated ledger, Laura noticed something odd. On the week Sarah disappeared, beneath the false mileage, Hensley had scribbled 3 letters in the margin. RK9. At first, she assumed it was shorthand for Road K9 checkpoint. But when she compared that note to later entries, the code appeared again, always next to trips where women vanished. Her partner, Special Agent Ruth Medina, made the connection first. What if it's not a code? She said. What if it's initials? RK, 9, Ray Keller, 9 p.m. Shift. It wasn't just a partnership, it was a system. Using the old CB radio registry records, a kind of pre-cell phone network for truckers, the Bureau uncovered that Keller and Hensley had operated under shared call signs. They'd used their radios not for coordination of freight, but of targets. One log, recovered from a retired dispatcher, contained a chilling note beside Hensley's call number, R32 check-in delayed personal pickup. That entry dated the 12th of October 1993. Sarah's last night alive. In September, the team received a new tip. A retired tow truck operator from neighboring Wayne County claimed he once helped pull a semi-rig out of a ditch. In late '93, the driver, he said, looked pale, nervous, like he'd seen something he shouldn't have. He remembered one other detail. The truck had a faded sticker on the back that read, Lantern Freight Co. Lantern Freight had been Keller and Hensley's employer before they left for independent routes. The coincidence was too direct to ignore. When Laura tracked down the old company's warehouse, a half-collapsed depot outside Ironton, the air inside still smelled of oil and rot. Rats scattered as investigators pried open rusted filing cabinets. Most of the records were destroyed, but tucked inside a folder marked Claims 1993 was a faded maintenance report. Vehicle hash on 14. Rear axle damage repair scheduled the 14th of October 1993. Driver, R. Keller. Location, Millbrook Route 32. He'd wrecked his rig less than 48 hours after Sarah disappeared. That detail reframed everything. Keller hadn't just been a bystander or accomplice. He'd been directly present that night, likely attempting to conceal evidence when his truck veered off-road. And yet he'd still gone unnoticed. No police report. No insurance claim, just a quiet and repair in a fading ledger. Laura could almost feel the weight of those decades, how easily men like them had slipped through cracks wide enough to swallow entire lives. The Bureau began to reconstruct the duo's ritual. Hensley would charm or lure victims, a helpful smile, a friendly gesture, while Keller followed at a distance in a second truck. Once the victim stopped, Keller would block the road from behind, trapping her. Hensley would use chloroform, subdue her, and together they'd move the body before dawn. Every route, every victim. Same method. It was efficient, practiced, and terrifyingly simple. Still, Laura wanted physical confirmation, something that tied Keller to the disposal sites directly. When forensic teams revisited the second location from his map, they found a buried metal drum about 6 feet deep. Inside were remnants of women's clothing and a plastic ID badge partially dissolved by rust. The name on it, Deborah Miller, missing from Indiana since 1992. The coroner's report later revealed identical traces of industrial chloroform and petroleum solvent, the same chemical blend found on Sarah Linton's clothing fragments. That single connection closed 3 separate cold cases in 1 week. By October 2021, the FBI held a press conference confirming that both men were now officially linked to at least 6 murders across 4 states. Journalists called them the highway predators, but Laura hated the label. It made them sound like myth's faceless monsters. In reality, they were ordinary men who'd used ordinary jobs as camouflage. She stood before the microphones that day and said softly, "They weren't ghosts, they were truckers, and they drove right past us for 20 years. Her words went viral. In the weeks that followed, families of missing women began calling the department. Old cases reopened, towns re-examined, disappearances once dismissed as accidents or runaways. Each call carried a different story, but the same ache: a mother who'd saved her daughter's diner apron for 30 years, a brother who still kept her car keys on his nightstand. And every time Laura hung up the phone, she felt Sarah Linton's presence threaded through them, all the catalyst who finally forced the truth into daylight. But the investigation wasn't over. One final photo from Keller's trailer remained unidentified, a diner no one recognized. Neon letters blurred, time-stamped June 2002. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a woman walking toward a white sedan. Her reflection in the window showed the same man's silhouette seen in Sarah's photo. Thin, tall, indistinct. When Laura enhanced the signage, 2 words emerged: Rusty Fork, a diner on Highway 41 Inches, Tennessee. 2 years later, a waitress named Angela Reese had vanished after a night shift there. Her case, too, had gone cold. The pattern was undeniable. Hensley and Keller had never stopped. They'd just changed states, changed diners, changed names. For law enforcement, it became one of the most haunting realizations that between 1991 and 2003, 2 ordinary men may have crossed paths with hundreds of women, and no one had truly seen them for what they were. And all it took to bring them down was a single ring unearthed by accident, a tiny rusted circle that had waited 26 years in the dirt. By winter, Millbrook began to heal. The diner reopened under new ownership. A small plaque was mounted near the booth where Sarah used to serve regulars, in memory of Sarah Linton, beloved daughter, friend, and light of Millbrook. Every year since, on October 12th, locals place a cup of coffee there half full, steaming, just like the one left behind in her car. Laura visits too, sometimes late at night when the roads are quiet and the lantern sign hums against the fog. She doesn't stay long, just enough to whisper a promise that the name still missing won't be forgotten. Yet, even now, in the unmarked corners of old highways, she knows there are stories waiting, others like Sarah, like Jennifer, like Deborah, whose truth still sleeps beneath gravel and weeds. Because in the end, every cold case is really a conversation with the dead, and sometimes, if you listen closely enough, they answer. The deeper the Bureau dug, the clearer it became. Hensley and Keller weren't unique. They were part of something larger. A loose web of long-haul drivers who crossed paths at the same stops, the same diners, the same unpatrolled stretches of America's forgotten highways. Men who worked under aliases, shared motel rooms, and sometimes shared stories that weren't supposed to be true. What investigators had stumbled into wasn't just 2 killers, it was the shadow side of the trucking world, a transient subculture built on distance, cash pay, and the comfort of anonymity. But proving that was another story. By late 2021, Detective Laura Gaines had spent nearly a year chasing ghosts through paper trails and gas receipts. Her desk was buried in maps, every one of them peppered with red pins and dates stretching back 30 years. Most represented confirmed victims. Others, just possibilities. One night, near midnight, she sat in her office reviewing Keller's final note again, the hand-drawn map with 4 women's names. They had found 3 of them, but one, Clara, 1,999, remained unsolved. There were no matching reports for a missing Clara that year. No cross-state connection. It didn't fit any of the established disappearances. Until one quiet afternoon, a retired truck dispatcher named Ed Moffat called the Millbrook tip line. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I don't know if it means anything," he said, "but back in '99, I had a driver named Keller call in a breakdown outside Hazard, Kentucky. He said his partner was bringing him parts. I logged it. It was a woman's name, Clara. She was supposed to meet them at a diner with a spare tire. A woman delivering truck parts? That made no sense." Laura asked him to check his old logbooks. 2 days later, Ed faxed over. The sheet faded, creased, but legible. The 5th of October 1999, Clara M. Lantern Route 24 stop, Hazard, KYETA, 10:45 p.m. It was the last entry written in blue ink before Keller's route went blank for 3 days. Laura and Agent Medina drove down to Hazard, a mountain town surrounded by coal ridges and ghosted service roads. Most of the diners were gone, replaced by chain stations, but locals remembered the one near the old freight depot, Maggie's Truck Stop Diner. That's where the trail ended. When they checked the county records, there was no missing person report for anyone named Clara in 1999. But a clerk in the courthouse basement, flipping through microfilm, found a curious police entry from that same week. The 6th of October 1999. Unidentified female driver reported missing by out-of-state fiancé, case closed within 72 hours. When vehicle located in West Virginia. The car had been found abandoned, miles away from where she'd last been seen. No body, no foul play established. The woman's name? Clara Mitchell. A 27-year-old delivery contractor for a small parts distributor, one that serviced long-haul freight trucks. Her case had never been investigated beyond a few cursory interviews. At the time, Keller and Hensley were still on the road, still invisible. But now, 22 years later, Laura saw the pattern instantly. Clara's route aligned perfectly with their schedule that week. They'd both signed in at a fuel depot 20 minutes from her last known location. When a warrant was issued to search the site where her car had been recovered, a rural pull-off off Route 119, cadaver dogs again alerted in the woods behind the guardrail. This time, buried beneath shale and clay, they found a rusted toolbox containing remnants of a woman's jewelry and a work badge engraved, C. Mitchell. DNA confirmed it. Clara was Keller's 4th known victim. That discovery shook Laura in a way the others hadn't. Sarah's case had felt personal, a story of injustice finally answered. But Clara's made her realize something deeper. These men had continued their rituals long after their partnership fractured, each driven by their own warped compulsion. Hensley may have been the original hunter, but Keller had learned the methods, the routes, the timing, the patience, and carried them on alone. It explained why the photographs in his trailer spanned decades. He hadn't stopped, he'd evolved, and he might not have been the last. In early 2022, federal investigators unearthed yet another connection, an online trucker forum archived from the early 2000s. Buried within the threads were posts under a username traced to Keller's CB handle, Rattler32. Most of the messages were innocuous road updates, fuel prices, but one post stood out. Old Lantern Road still burn bright. Coffee's hot, girls still smile. See you on the 32. It was dated the 12th of October 2002, 9 years to the day after Sarah disappeared. Laura stared at the screen for a long time. The message wasn't random. It was a ritual, an anniversary post. He'd kept writing to her memory, taunting anyone who might one day look close enough to see. And beneath the surface of that message, investigators found replies from other drivers using similar language, cryptic nods, shared jokes, locations that matched historic abduction sites. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a community, a hidden thread of men who traded stories under coded language, glorifying the girls of the road, like urban legends. It wasn't proof of murder, but it revealed a terrifying truth. Hensley and Keller weren't anomalies. They were part of a culture of silence that stretched across the interstate map like a second, invisible network. When the case went public, the media descended again. Millbrook became a pilgrimage site for reporters, documentarians, and podcast crews eager to retell Sarah's story. But Laura refused most interviews. She didn't want her voice to compete with the echo of Sarah's. One evening, sitting in the diner alone after closing, she found herself watching the reflection of the new neon sign in the window, same flicker, same hum. The waitress, a college kid not much older than Sarah had been, set down a mug of coffee and asked quietly, "Was she scared, you think?" Laura hesitated, then said softly, "I think she was brave enough to trust someone she shouldn't have, and that's what makes it terrifying." The girl nodded and walked away. The mug steamed between them, a silent bridge between past and present. By spring 2022, Operation Lantern officially concluded. 30 years of questions had finally found enough answers to fill hundreds of pages of reports, documentaries, and FBI files. Sarah Linton was no longer just a face on a poster. She was the reason dozens of families across multiple states finally knew the truth about their missing daughters. The final summary listed 9 confirmed victims. Dozens more remained under review. But for Laura, the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was what the case had revealed about the nature of evil, not monsters in the dark, but men who waved politely, who helped you fix a tire, who smiled through the diner glass. And the quiet truth that justice, when it finally arrives, rarely feels like victory. It feels like exhaustion. That winter, the Rusty Lantern Diner hung a small framed newspaper clipping near the register, the one announcing the final arrest confirmation. Below it, a note in Sarah's mother's handwriting read, "For every girl who didn't make it home, we kept the light on." And they still do. Every October 12th, when fog rolls across Route 32, locals claim the neon hum sounds just a little louder. Some say it's the wind, others say it's the road remembering. But Laura knows better. It's not memory. It's a warning. Because the past doesn't vanish when you bury it. It waits for someone to dig deep enough to listen. By the time the dust settled, Operation Lantern had become one of the most comprehensive cold case investigations in Ohio's history. 9 confirmed victims, 14 potential matches under review, and 2 men long dead who had eluded justice for nearly 3 decades. Yet, for all the headlines, the documentaries, and the official reports, what stayed with Detective Laura Gaines wasn't the numbers. It was the sound of silence after the cameras stopped rolling. The quiet that followed when she drove back down Route 32 alone. That road had changed since 1993, widened, repaved, lined with reflective guardrails. But every time her headlights traced its curves, she still pictured Sarah's blue Corolla pulled off the shoulder, steam curling from the coffee cup in the cup holder, the radio faintly buzzing, the driver's seat empty, because the truth, she'd realized, doesn't erase ghosts, it just names them. In early 2023, Laura met with Sarah's parents one final time before the case was archived. They'd asked her to bring one thing, the class ring. It had been cleaned, repolished, and sealed in an evidence-safe box. Ellen Linton opened it slowly, her hands trembling as she lifted the tiny gold band that had spent 26 years underground. For a long time, no one spoke. "She wore this every day," Ellen whispered. Said it made her feel like she hadn't left home. Her husband, Thomas, nodded quietly. "She's home now," he said. They thanked Laura, not with words but with a kind of heavy gratitude that she felt in her chest more than her ears. As she left their porch, she noticed the front light still on the same bulb Ellen had never replaced, burning faint and warm against the burning, cold air. The porch light wasn't for hope anymore. It was for remembrance. After that meeting, Laura thought she was done, but closure has a way of refusing to stay closed. One night, while sorting her files for storage, she found a photograph tucked between the final reports. An old Polaroid, warped and faded. It showed the Rusty Lantern Diner sometime in the early 90s, a line of cars in the lot, the neon sign glowing red. In the foreground stood a young waitress, her hair tied back, smiling as she wiped down a table by the window. It was Sarah. Someone had taken it before she vanished, maybe a coworker, maybe a regular customer. On the back, in blue ink, was a note. Last shift before the storm. Laura stared at it for a long time. That photograph wasn't evidence. It was a moment, a heartbeat of ordinary life that had survived everything that came after. She placed it in an envelope and drove it to the diner the next morning. The owner framed it and hung it above the counter, right next to the coffee machine. Now, when locals come in late at night, they see her face smiling down from the wall. And the coffee beneath it never runs out. The bureau closed the file in February 2023. Reporters called Laura the woman who solved the unsolvable. But she never saw it that way. She knew what really solved it wasn't brilliance, it was persistence, timing, and luck. A construction crew's shovel had done what decades of detective work couldn't. And behind that luck were all the people who refused to let Sarah's name fade. A mother who kept calling the sheriff's office, a detective who carried her photo in his wallet, a town that never stopped whispering her story. That's what cracked the case. Not technology, not forensics, but human stubbornness, the refusal to stop asking why. Months later, a journalist asked Laura during a podcast interview what she'd learned from it all. She paused before answering. "I learned that evil isn't always obvious," she said. "Sometimes it's just ordinary men in ordinary jobs who learn how to disappear in plain sight. And I learned that a small town's memory can outlast almost anything, even the men who tried to bury it." The host went quiet. Then he asked what she thought about Sarah herself. Laura smiled faintly. "I think she'd be proud that she was the one who stopped them, even if it took 30 years. By autumn, Route 32 looked almost peaceful again. The leaves turned copper, the fog rolled down from the hills, and truckers rumbled through like they always had. But if you pull off onto the old service road, the one that's mostly swallowed by weeds now, you'll see a small wooden cross staked near the culvert. No flowers. Just a ring of coffee cups around it, left by strangers passing through. Every one of them tells the same story, that they stopped for a moment, turned off their engines, and listened. Some say they can hear the faint hum of a truck idling somewhere far off. Others swear they hear a woman's voice on the wind, calm, steady, like she's finally telling her story the way she always wanted it told. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's what justice sounds like when it finally catches up. Detective Gaines retired that winter. She left behind 20 years of service, dozens of solved cases, but Sarah's file stayed framed on her office wall until the last day. Before turning in her badge, she wrote one final note in the margin of the case summary. "Closure isn't the end. It's just the part where the living stop running and start listening." She slipped the note inside and sealed the file for archives. Then she drove home along Route 32, headlights slicing through fog. The world as still and heavy as it had been that October night in 1993. In 2024, a true crime documentary aired on Netflix titled The Light on Route 32. It chronicled the full investigation, the disappearances, the ring, the locker, the partnership that spanned half the country. It ended with a slow drone shot of Millbrook at dawn, the diner lights flickering on, a waitress unlocking the door, a fresh pot of coffee brewing. And in that quiet shot, just for a second, the camera caught the reflection of the old neon sign glowing red against the window. 2 words, the same as they'd always been. Rusty Lantern. The narrator's voiceover closed with a line Laura herself had written. "Evil doesn't hide in the dark, it hides in routine. But every now and then, the smallest light, even from a forgotten diner on a rainy night, is enough to show us where it's been." Sarah Linton's story isn't about monsters. It's about the fragile threads that hold ordinary lives together and how easily they can snap when trust meets the wrong pair of hands. It's about a town that refused to forget, a detective who refused to give up, and a ring that refused to stay buried. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't come when we want it to. It comes when it's ready, when the ground is soft enough to let it breathe again. And when it does, it changes everything. If stories like this stay with you, like this video, so more true crime lovers can find it. Comment your thoughts or theories about Sarah's case below. How would you have investigated it? And subscribe for more cold cases that prove sometimes the truth really does resurface.